So today I'm going to talk about patterns. Whether it's your native tongue or a second language you're trying to learn as an adult, mastering any language is all about recognizing and repeating patterns. Now, when you were very young, you learned the patterns of your native language, listening to thousands of hours of it on a continual basis. Now, whenever someone says something that doesn't match one of those patterns, what do you say? That sounds wrong. When it comes to learning a second language, many people believe that that is still the best approach. They keep listening to the language and trying to pick up on those patterns so they can, eventually speak the language fluently. That's why most students who follow that approach are very familiar with greetings because, that's how we open up every conversation. And they're good with small talk that would be prompted by a question like, ¿Cómo estás? How are you? But then after that, many of them are just lost. And the reason is that they're only able to talk about things that they've actually heard. They're repeating things they've heard, and normally more than once, many, many times. So if you've never heard somebody say that particular thing, you're not going to be able to say it. But what if I told you there is an easier way to learn those patterns? And that once you learn a pattern, you're going to be able to accurately create your own sentences in Spanish, even if you have never heard or seen that particular sentence before. I know you're skeptical. I would be too if I was watching this video. So I'm going to demonstrate exactly how it works in this video. So stay tuned, all right? But first, I want to give a shout out to Cecil and Anna Maria, a couple of YouTubers with a really interesting channel called The Spanglish Life. Not Spanglish, Spanglish. He's from the US, she's from Colombia. They got married. I know that story sounds very similar to my own. My wife's from Colombia, I'm from the US. One difference with their story is that they are living in Colombia. They have a great channel where they share their story, they show scenes from Colombia. It's super interesting, so be sure to check it out after this video. So let's talk about patterns. Some patterns will allow you to learn Spanish vocabulary more quickly than you normally would. You don't have to go word for word. Well, other patterns are going to allow you to create sentences and grammatically correct sentences. You're not going to sound like Tarzan out there. As an adult learning Spanish, you have to make a concerted effort to learn these patterns. It's not just going to happen with you just sitting there. I've known people that have lived in Spanish-speaking countries for years and they never pick up the language. You're going to have to make an effort, okay? I'm going to tell you that right up front. Fortunately, it is not as difficult as you might think to learn those patterns. And this is why. You already speak a language, right? I assume it's English because you're watching this particular video. That language already has its own structure and vocabulary, so you're already familiar with patterns in your own language. And fortunately, when you compare English and Spanish, they share a lot of common roots, and we're going to take advantage of that. One thing that's really going to help you is that Spanish is a very logically laid out language, grammatically speaking, which is going to make those patterns easier to learn. And because you're using logic and your knowledge of the pattern to create many of these sentences, you may come up with things you've never seen or heard before, but they will be 100% grammatically correct. Again, that's cool. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's say you've never spoken Spanish in your life, and I asked you to translate these sentences on the screen. I want to participate. I want to confirm the information. I want to consider the options. I want to observe the action. All of our sentences start the same way with I want, but then they go in different directions, right? So let's focus on that. I'm going to teach you how to say I want. And again, this is, assuming you've never learned any Spanish. So we would have quiero, quiero, I want. That one word you could use for I want. So now you know how to start every single sentence. You think you can do the rest? It's not going to be as tough as you think, all right? Because I'm going to teach you a pattern. This is going to be a vocabulary pattern. So this pattern is really a cognate, and cognates are words from two different languages that share the same roots, so they are very similar. And with this particular cognate trick, I like to call it, I call it the tion-cion trick, is we're going to take words in English that end in tion and we're going to convert them into Spanish. Now you'll see some tion words up there, but I'm not going to use one of those because I want you to come up with it on your own. I'm going to teach you a pattern and see if you can do it. So let's take a word, anticipation, okay? If I want to change that into Spanish, I'm going to change that T to a C. I'm going to put an accent over the O, and I'm just going to pronounce it like you would in Spanish. Anticipación, anticipación. There it is, anticipation in Spanish. That's the pattern. So now that you know the pattern, take a look at our sentences. Are there any tion words that we can convert? Well, I see information, options, and action. Let's start with information. What are we going to do? Change the T to a C, put an accent over the O. What are you going to get? Información, información. And really the key to Spanish pronunciation is to learn how to pronounce the vowels. They will have the same sound all the time, so it's not that tough. So that's how information turns into información. Now, let's skip over options for a second. Let's go to action. What are we going to do? T to C, and we're going to pronounce it. Action would be acción. But there it is. Let's go to options. That's plural. But just for a second, let's drop the S and just make it option. What are we going to do? T to C, accent over the O, opción. Now, to make it plural, we're going to have to add ES. Because in Spanish, that's another pattern. If it ends in a vowel, I can just stick an S on there. If it doesn't, I have to put ES. So this would become opciones. Wow. Our pattern just helped us get all of those. But we still need verbs, right? What do we got there? We got participate, confirm, consider, observe. Well, we got another pattern, okay? Can you think of a tion word for any of those? Participate. Can you think of a tion word? Can you make that a noun? Participation, right? Confirm, confirmation. Consider, consideration. Observe, observation. And you're like, yeah, but those are nouns, Paul. We need verbs. I know, we need verbs. We're going to take our tion-cion trick just a step further, and we're going to use it to make verbs. All right, it's going to be super cool. So let's just take a look at these nouns first. What do we get? Participation. T to C, accent over the O, right, would become participación. Confirmation would become confirmación. Consideration would become consideración. Observation would become observación. Now, take a look at those. Do they end in A-C-I-O-N? Yes. So what we're going to do is drop the ción part and just add an R to each one. And what do we get? Participar, to participate. There's your verb. Confirmar, to confirm. Considerar, to consider. Observar, to observe. Now we have verbs, right? And they're unconjugated. And that's what we need here. So we're just going to plug them in. So we put them together. I want. What is it? Quiero participar. I want to participate. I want to confirm the information. What did we miss there? I want to confirm we don't have the. Well, in Spanish, every noun is either masculine or feminine. And that's very unusual, I know, for us English speakers to wrap our heads around, but that's the way it is. And every single noun that we create with our tion-cion cognate trick is going to be feminine. So the part will be la if it's singular and las if it's plural. That's the pattern. Plug it in, knowing that pattern. So I want to confirm the information would be quiero confirmar la información. I want to consider the options would be quiero considerar las opciones because it's plural, right? So it's las. And I want to observe the action. Quiero observar la acción. It's not too tough, right? It's just patterns. So when you're learning these patterns, you're going to be able to pop them all together and use them in different types of circumstances. And all the while, you're going to be learning other Spanish vocabulary that doesn't follow cognates. And a good example will be the verb ir, which means to go. Okay? So if I say I want to go, what does I want? Quiero. And then you have ir. So it just goes right in after it, right? Quiero ir. I want to go. Let's say you like to go to the beach, right? That would be quiero ir a la playa. The a part means to. See? Just learn that. That's not too tough. Quiero ir a la playa. That's a type of pattern you would use a lot. Quiero ir a wherever you want to go. And you can learn different vocabulary. But what if we work this into the patterns I just showed you? And you want to translate a sentence like, instead of participating, I want to go to the beach. And you're like, wow, that got really complex, right? Well, you already know the I want to go to the beach. That part's easy. So you're like, instead of participating, what would that even be? So I'm going to teach you another pattern to be able to do this. So you have instead of, right? En lugar de. Okay, so en lugar de participating, you're like, wow, you do know how to say to participate because it's one of your cognate tricks. You just did that one, right? But here it has ing ending in English. You're like, what's that going to be in Spanish? Does it seem easier if I teach you this formula? En lugar de plus the infinitive or unconjugated verb. All the verbs we made were in the infinitive. They were not conjugated. So what would we plug in here? En lugar de participar, to participate. And you already know the rest. Quiero ir a la playa. Now that you've seen the pattern, can you translate this one? Instead of confirming the information, I want to go to the beach. I'm so confident that you'll get this one right that I'm not even going to walk you through it, okay? I'm just going to give you some time. If it helps, go ahead and jot it down, because it is a longer sentence. So. What'd you come up with? I'm already guessing that you came up right away with en lugar de, and you might have paused a little at that confirming. That's from our tion-cion cognate trick, which is a pattern. We think confirmation, confirmación, confirmar. Okay, en lugar de confirmar the information, la información, and the rest of it's unchanged. Quiero ir a la playa. Let's stick it all together, all right? En lugar de confirmar la información, quiero ir a la playa. I think you're getting the hang of it, so let's drop that whole quiero ir a la playa thing and just go ahead and translate these two phrases on the screen. Instead of considering the options, instead of observing the action. I imagine this is getting easier because right away you're already like, en lugar de, both times. It comes right out, right? That's how it works. En lugar de considerar las opciones. Did you get las? Because it's plural, right? And our other one is, en lugar de observar la acción. Do you get that one too? Patterns. It's just patterns. And I just want to make it clear that the point of this particular video is not to teach you these particular patterns. It's just to show you how you can use patterns to learn Spanish faster. Let's look at that formula again. En lugar de plus infinitive or unconjugated verb. Now, it's neat, right? Well, there are other little phrases that follow that same pattern. And here's two of them. Antes de plus infinitive, which means before doing something, and después de plus infinitive after doing something. So if we look at our sentences and I want to say before participating, what would that look like? Antes de participar. What if I want to say after participating? That would be después de participar. Now the question you might have now is, where do you find these patterns so you can learn them? Well, you can learn them by watching my videos because that's basically how I teach Spanish. I don't always call them patterns. Sometimes I call them formulas or plug and play phrases, something like that, but it's all the same thing. Another thing you can do, and I know a lot of people are going to hate this answer, is to learn the grammatical rules. Honestly, it's not that tough. I just showed you some of them. They're just little patterns. When people think of grammar, they often think of their own language and those classes, when you had to take English courses and they're like, what's the noun? What's the preposition? And you're like, who cares? I speak English. And I still feel that way. I don't see the benefit as much, in my own language. But when it comes to learning Spanish, well, everything changed. And then I realized the grammar was the way to do it because somebody had already figured out all of these patterns and wrote them all down. This is an amazing book, by the way. I'll tell you about it in 1 second. But they've already identified all of the patterns. So I can read through and learn a pattern and then apply it and come up with sentences, again, that I've never seen or heard before in Spanish, and they will be grammatically correct. So if you do like this patterns approach and you want to learn more, I really recommend that you get this book, The New Reference Grammar of Modern Spanish. It is absolutely phenomenal. Some folks are like, oh, that's more, for advanced students, Paul. No, it's for everybody. It's the thing that really propelled this book, well, an earlier version of it, really propelled my Spanish back in the day. I would open it up, and it's a reference guide. It's not made to just read through from cover to cover, but I would go through, and it has little headings and things, and I would be like, that's interesting. Oh, what's the difference between deber and deber de? Oh, that's interesting. And some of them were too advanced for me, so I'd just be like, oh, probably never understand that. And then I'd go through, but I found things that even as a beginner really boosted my Spanish. And again, when I'm learning the rules are just patterns. And then as I became more intermediate and even advanced, some of those other sections, those were suddenly relevant. So this book will follow you throughout your entire Spanish learning journey, I'm telling you. If you're interested in getting one, I do have a link to it in the description section of the video. I'd appreciate if you use it. It doesn't cost you anything more, but then at least it helps support the channel. So I would never tell you to get something that I don't absolutely believe in. So great book. All right, back to patterns. Learning these patterns will allow you to create your own sentences, but that's only one aspect of learning a language, right? You'll still need to work on your pronunciation, verbal comprehension, and continue filling in those gaps in your vocabulary. I mean, we can't use cognates for everything. You're going to actually have to learn some Spanish words. But the good news is that you'll improve in all of those areas with more practice and exposure to the language. And learning those patterns is going to get you talking, so the person will be talking back. You see? You see how it's important? Patterns. Well, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, just do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego.